Hey everyone, and thank you for your time. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the project that I was working on, this research project for my contrastive stylistic class. And for this particular project, I chose two types of text. This was a legal document and a medical document, and they were both talking about rare genetic diseases. But before I get ahead of myself, let me tell you a little bit about the background and why I chose those particular texts. Well, last month I had the opportunity to serve as a conference interpreter at this scientific exchange meeting in Jersey City. It was hosted by a pharmaceutical company, and the attendants were these scientists from Latin America and the United States. Now, the entire topic of conversation was about a rare genetic disorder called Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. Of course, it was also sort of challenging because, number one, the terminology that they gave us was deficient, and we didn't have enough time to prepare for this particular assignment. I think the people who were running the show were not anticipating that there were going to be so many different moving parts. So at times it was a little frustrating, especially given that these scientists were so eager to share their knowledge with their colleagues, and they were talking at a very rapid rate. But at the end of the event, I had a greater appreciation for the job that these some of these pharmaceutical companies do, and these scientists in places like Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, and even here in the United States. They're trying to find cures for rare genetic diseases. This particular one that they were talking about was called Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, and this is the kind of disease that affects children who are within the ages between the ages of, I want to say, 4 and 6. So the fact that I am a dad to two boys who are 7 and 5 made this feel a little more personal. Alright, so great, I was able to find my medical text, but I still had to find my legal text. And the problem is that the Spanish language literature that is focused from a legal perspective on Duchenne muscular dystrophy is not very common. So I had to look around until I finally found an article from a ruling or an order from a Colombian court, but they were talking about a similar disease, but it was also genetic in nature. And this was a disease called Morquio-A syndrome, with some really complicated scientific name, mucopolysaccharidosis. Imagine that. So here's my source text. This was the actual Colombian court ruling, and this was a document that originally it's 3,000 words long, but I selected the first 1,000 words. And this document deals with, let's see, it's a ruling by the Supreme Court of Justice. This is the Criminal Appellate Division, and they're mediating, or they're actually resolving a dispute or an actual challenge that was presented by this woman, a plaintiff. The plaintiff is the mother of a 13-year-old girl, as you can see here, because esta entidad no ha prestado la debida atención asistencia médica que requiere la menor para atender la grave patología que presenta. So, but she is affected with the syndrome, the Morquio-A syndrome with muscular dystrophy. So it was close enough. I think that both of them, both Duchenne and Morquio-A, have very similar traits. So once I obtained my instructor's approval to begin with this translation, then great. Now it's the time to find my medical document. And the medical document comes from Ambato, Ecuador. This is a clinical case, this is a case study on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So the document itself is about 92 pages long. So I had to select the 1,000 words, and thankfully I think it was later down in one of these pages where it actually starts. Now, this particular document deals with, this is actually, how do I say it? Like I mentioned, it's a case report. This was written by a student in this university in Ambato, and she was writing about Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, but she's also presenting an actual example, a case study of a child who is 10 years old and suffers this disease. So she's presenting the information, addressing not only the symptoms and the medical knowledge about the disease, but also doing it in such a way that respects the specific register of the text. So one of the common traits that these two texts have is that they are written with a formal register, all right? This means that you can expect both texts to contain very similar, I guess, ways of handling the terminology. Of course, the terminology for each text will be specific to their own type of text type. So you can have some specialized words for the legal field and some specialized ones for the medical. But when I had to do the actual lexical analysis, the one thing that I found kind of helpful was to divide them into three categories: the technical words, semi-technical words, and the everyday words. And I did this because I believe that these three categories work together to create a specific meaning for this particular type of register and for the text. The first one, the technical words, let me tell you some of the technical terms that I found in my legal source text. I found terms like derecho fundamental, fallo impugnado, sala penal mayoritaria, to name a few. And then in the medical source text, there you have terms like pseudohipertrofia, escoliosis progresiva, distrofia muscular de Duchenne, herencia recesiva, lordosis lumbar. So these are very highly specialized technical terms. But when it comes to the terms that are somewhere in between being everyday words and technical terms, there's that category, the semi-technical terms. In the legal source text, I found terms like argumentos, progenitora, competente, vulnerar. You probably heard them before. And in the medical source text, I found incidencia, portadores, habilidades motoras, mantenimiento postural, just to name a few. Now, in both legal and medical source text, I found some everyday words, and when you combine them with the technical and semi-technical terms, they all sort of work in tandem. And some of these terms are like asistencia, salud, menor, resolver, temprana edad, impacto económico, pelvis, piernas, coordinación, marcha, particularidades. They're not exactly very technical or semi-technical, but when you put them together with this particular type of text and with a type of register, then, you know, you're cooking with Crisco. Now, when it comes to the actual communicative purpose of these documents, in the legal source text, I found that it's procedural in nature. It's simply narrating and describing the case background and the decisions that were made by this lower court, and it's being addressed from this magistrate or from this judge to the plaintiff and all the named defendants, right? When it comes to its factuality, it's presenting the opinion of a court. And on the other hand, you have the medical source text. And what the source text is doing is narrating also and informing, describing the medical knowledge of the disease before the author introduces the subject of the entire conversation, this child who's been afflicted with DMD. But the fundamental purpose of the source text is to not only to describe what's going on, but also present it to colleagues and people in the medical community, because based on the research that I have made, these case studies serve as a stepping stone, which helps other scientists and physicians and doctors all over the world to understand what's worked in the past, what symptoms should be present with this specific patient who is suffering from a disease, So all this knowledge is contributing to the increase in knowledge. But of course, it's important to mention that this particular document, this particular text, is actually a thesis written by a student, and she's presenting it to the examiners in her university so that they will allow her to graduate. Now, when it comes to the actual syntactic analysis, I wanted to mention this particular aspect of the legal source text. In our class, we learned that one of the things that distinguishes the Spanish written register is that it uses a lot of what's called hypotaxis. So the clauses are together, they're joined together by a series of conjunctions, but that they denote a type of hierarchical relationship. Now, let me put it better this way. As you can see here in this particular document on the left-hand side, you have this sentence. En ese sentido, manifiesta que MASM fue diagnosticada en el año 2013 con la enfermedad bla bla bla, motivo por el cual los médicos especialistas que la han tratado. So the way that I translated this sentence was, to that effect, she expressly stated that MASM was diagnosed with blah blah blah, this disease, in 2013, and for that reason, the specialist that treated her prescribed. So here's a complex compound sentence, and it contains subordinate clauses, and you can see how by using this particular clause right here, motivo por el cual, this one right here, we're establishing a connection that is being defined in one of the textbooks as hypotactic. And in this particular instance, I chose to maintain that same hypotaxis in the target language. Now here on the right hand side, you see the example of the medical source text and where this syntactic feature of hypotaxis is occurring. So as you can see here in this portion that I have underlined, existe debilidad muscular progresiva de la pelvis y las piernas, la cual se asocia a pérdida de masa muscular. I translated that as progressive muscle weakness of the pelvis, progressive muscle weakness of the pelvis and legs occurs, associated with loss of muscle mass. Now in this case, when I did the translation, I did not use that particular clause that creates the hierarchical relationship, that subordination, when it says la cual se asocia. So instead of saying which is associated with, I simply said progressive muscle weakness of the pelvis and legs occurs, comma, associated with loss of muscle mass. I think this is more in keeping with the fact that English prefers a parataxis as opposed to a hypotaxis. Now, when it comes to the actual terminology of the source text for the legal and medical documents, well, I found some terms that require a little more research. One of them, as you see here on the left-hand side, derecho fundamental is not fundamental right, it's constitutional right. Now, here's another one that was actually brought to my attention by the consultant, by the subject matter expert that I reach out to. Fonoaudiología. It's not, in this case, it's not just translated as audiology, as some dictionaries will say, but in this case, it deals with both speech and sound. So in this case, and I would have to translate fonoaudiología as speech therapy and audiology. Oh, here's a very interesting one, galenos. Now, what's interesting is that galenos in Spanish is used as a synonym for doctors and physicians, but the background to this particular word is actually historic. Back in the 2nd century, AD, there was some very famous Greek doctor in some city, I think called Pergamus, and he was the most, the best or the most well-known physician in the ancient world. So everyone who followed in his footsteps were being called galenos. Now in the medical source text, you have some interesting terms here on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have portadoras, that means carriers, pseudo-hypertrophia, the pseudo-hypertrophic, and what else? Gower sign. This is actually a very specialized term that's used mostly with neurological disorders. Now, scoliosis progressiva, I saw in some dictionaries that it was being translated as progressive curvature of the spine. But since we're trying to maintain the register here, then progressive scoliosis is the most adequate term that we can use in the target text. So overall, I would say that when I found my 10 legal and 10 medical terms that I could use to, to present the research that I did on the terminological side, one of the things that was really helpful was to have was not to just conduct my research through these dictionaries, but also reach out to some of these forums like proz.com, and also to consult with these specialists, people who have been in the industry for a little longer and who could help me resolve some issues when I'm not quite sure if that's the best way to explain or to translate a term. Now, when it comes to some of the when I do the contrastive analysis and when I see the similarities and the differences, I saw that in the actual legal source text, both in, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I found that both in the Colombian document, which is the legal document here on the left, and the Ecuadorian medical document here on the right, I found that they were being very particular about maintaining the privacy of the minors. None of these documents refer, to the child in any other names, but with synonyms or pronouns that are respectful and are in keeping with a particular register. So you can expect the legal source text to just mention the child, the minor. When it comes to the mother, it identifies her by name, but it also calls her the plaintiff or the party to this lawsuit. And the medical source text talks about the child as the patient, or in a few instances, the child. So I think in both, one of the features of both texts is that these are documents that will be used for the well-being and health of the child. So they want to make sure that, in keeping with the laws of each country, they protect the privacy of each child. And I also thought that when it comes to the they both want to accomplish the same objective, like I mentioned, to protect or to do something positive for the child. And they're both informative in nature, which is, great coincidence, that I found documents with the same communicative purpose. But they're approaching it from their own perspectives, within their own constraints. So that for me was great. But obviously, some of the differences in these documents is that on the legal source text, they basically focus on the legal relief and the dispositions that are available for the minor and her mother. But on the medical source text, they don't talk so much about precedent or about the, some of these aspects that you can find in the legal text. But it can be more technical about anatomy and about symptomatology, whatever it's called, and in providing a clear picture, clinical picture, and relevant statistical data that will help people, not just now, but people who read this down the road. Another interesting difference between both texts is that the legal source text uses when it's using the verb tenses, it prefers to use the perfect tense to connect the past actions to present consequences. For instance, it's in the legal source text, they're talking about él ha hablado, ella ha dicho, ella ha dictado, ella ha promulgado. So the past still has relevance to the present. But in the medical source text, you have some very finite collocations. Se decidió, se hizo, el niño se cayó, and so on. Alright, so bear with me, I'm almost over. I'm almost done. Alright, so I'm going to mention this particular translation challenge that I had in translating this particular term, la sala penal mayoritaria. Now, the first thing is, obviously, I know that penal relates to criminal, and I know that they're talking about Tribunal Superior de Buga. It's actually the Superior Court of Buga. But mayoritaria, that is kind of tricky. So I thought at first that it had to do with like a high court, and as we know, the legal system that operates in Colombia is the civil law, which is not the same as in the United States, which is common law. Alright, so since I was a little stumped here, I reached out to the translation community, and I asked this question in prosy.com. Now, one of the, as you can see, I have 3 different responses. Bench of the Criminal Division, or by majority opinion, the Criminal Division. Actually, this is kind of new. I hadn't seen this one before. And the Major Criminal Division of the Supreme Court. Now, obviously, there were some interesting justifications as to why that should be the case. And I kind of like the one from this particular individual from Chile. It says, where he's saying that it should be bench of the Criminal Division of the Supreme Court, or mayoritaria, a court where there are several judges and a majority vote decides the case. And this is called a bench in numerous English language jurisdictions like England and Wales, India, amongst others. Well, but when I reached out to one of the subject matter experts that I consulted, and this is someone who has quite a number of years of experience doing translation and interpreting in legal settings and in all kinds of different settings, he tells me that there's a simpler and better way of rendering the same meaning. And he said, just to translate it as the majority of the criminal division, or the majority of the criminal court. I think this was a little frustrating because I had put the bench of the criminal division or something along those lines in my first draft, and I was sure that that was the best choice, but then when the expert comes and tells me no, that's actually not as good as saying it this way. So sometimes you have to trust those who have been longer in the business than you have. All right, almost there. Now, when it comes to the aspect of the subject matter expert consultations, it was humbling, to say the least, that I found 2 of these. I actually found 3 experts, 3 people who could actually give me some very good feedback. The first one was Alfredo Huerta. He has a PhD from, I forgot the name of the university, but he is an associate professor in the Department of Biology at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and he has 36 publications to his name in both English and Spanish, plus 35 years of experience teaching and conducting scientific research. Well, he's definitely going to give me a very, very good opinion on my writing. And, well, he tells me that, I'm not going to read everything he says, but he tells me, regarding your translation, I think your work was of high quality and conveyed the information needed in an understandable way. However, I feel that you might benefit by reading and studying a few original medical science publications so that you can develop your writing style for that purpose. So he says it's good, but you can do better. So that's good. Now, I also wanted to consult with someone who didn't speak Spanish, and someone who was a doctor but who could give me his opinion. This is when I reached out to Dr. Anil Garg, who he's an internist in Washington, New Jersey. He's been practicing for more than 20 years and received his medical degree from a university in Uttar Pradesh, India. And he tells me, well, the document reads clearly, does not have any ambiguities or awkward grammar constructions. He tells me the document gives a clear understanding of the disease and all the details necessary to describe the etiology, progression, social and emotional components of the disease. So as someone who does not speak Spanish and he reads the English document, he will be able to understand it. So I guess it balances things out, I guess. But I had to reach out to my legal consultant. I reached out to Dr. Michael Powers, who has another very impressive resume under his belt. He actually has a PhD in Ibero-Romance philology and linguistics from the University of Texas at Austin, and has been in business since 1985. Now, some of the suggestions he actually gave me helped me to create a better second and final version of the legal target text. He says, there are parts of the translation that are well done. However, there are 4 areas for improvement. In more than one case, translations were repeated. This is true. I actually did not proofread it as closely as I should have. Hence, there must be closer editing and proofreading. In legal documents, you should not be more explicit in the translation than the original. Look at this. Since you may be subpoenaed to defend your translation, these liberties should not be taken. So you should not be more explicit in the translation than the original, because you might be, as a translator, you might have to defend your translation, especially if it's of a legal nature. And finally, there are some terms, at times legal and at times general, that need to be translated to provide the correct meaning and not simply the words. Examples of these are physical integrity instead of physical safety. He's the one who told me about fonoaudiología, that should be translated as speech therapy and audiology. He mentions register, that it is important to make sure that my register, that the way that I'm writing, is maintained formal, and I accomplish this through a good, through a lexical selection. He says that there are some other grammar mistakes here and there, like punctuation mistakes, and he concludes it by saying that I hope these observations will contribute to better translation. So there's some room for improvement here. Now, conclusions. The final thing that I'm going to say. I think ultimately it is important that as a translator we incorporate, I don't want to sound condescending, I think this also applies to me. We all have to incorporate a serious linguistic analysis into every legal and medical project. Sometimes the clients will not be there to tell us about the scopus of the particular document, what's the purpose, who's the person that's going to be there. So sometimes we can actually gather all this information from having a clear understanding of the legal and the medical source text. What are some of the expectations that you can see in both texts, and then once you have this, then you can start crafting the translation. And if you have the opportunity to get your clients here, then you can start telling him, listen, I need you to tell me this, this, and this, because it doesn't conform to what I'm writing, or this is not how it's expressed in English or in Spanish. And then you can dazzle them, not just with these facts, but you can dazzle them with a product that will be fit for purpose. So that's it. I'm not going to run my mouth any longer. I appreciate your time very much, and thank you for this opportunity, and have a happy holidays.